Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons, and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level.
All right, my friend, we're back.
What's happening?
We're back. So today we've talked a lot about like different aspects of this that we wanted to cover. And I think we've sort of come up with a few different areas that we really want to hit on. And we are going to kind of talk about male insecurities and diving into that because they affect all of us. And I think that there's a lot of aspects of this that don't get covered quite as often. And we're going to start with the part that often gets, when you and I have discussed this with your family over the last few days and some friends, it has gotten the most attention. So we are going to lead off with the penis talk.
Yeah, it's hilarious. So my family, for you listeners, are just incredibly, what would you say, liberal in terms
Very
of like
sexually liberal.
Sexually liberal. Yes. So we have lots of, and I have teenage, well, I guess they're not teenagers anymore, but early 20s, late teens. Well, Zen is. So my nephews, I have 3 nephews and 2 nieces. And they're all young in their late teens, early 20s. And of course, always asking about sex. And Emily was at the house and we were like, hey, we were talking about maybe doing a podcast on penises and male insecurity and stuff like that. And they were like, oh my God, like especially the nieces.
Yeah, and they had some friends over too, and they were like, what?
Yeah.
We want more.
All the guys and the girls were like, so this maybe something, for the slightly younger crowd, but I think you'll get, regardless of your age, you're going to relate to this. And I think it's just useful to kind of have this discussion around men because we often don't think of men as being insecure. And especially with a penis is a really interesting thing because, if you look at it, right, like I even think like just if you go, men obviously have to show. Right. So, it's something that is on the outside of their body. Women are very tucked in their genitalia. It's not something that you would necessarily compare outright from woman to woman. This is probably why breast size is more what women do in that regard. But for men, penis size is definitely something that I think men are thinking about. And not just penis size, but all the aspects of that. Like, is it normal? Does it look normal? Am I circumcised, uncircumcised? What culture am I in? And how does that sort of relate? And all of these kinds of issues around this. Now, one of the ways I'll lead off with this, and then I'll see what kind of questions you want to ask, is just a consideration to think about for a second. We are like it or not, and there's a whole dynamic around this, and I'm sure Emily and I will tackle it in a future podcast episode, but like it or not, we are a culture, at least in the West, that is very much inundated with porn, and porn is something that many people, especially men, and I do think that this is certainly bared out. The research has been done on this. Men are more engaged with porn than women. Now, plenty of women are, but there are far more men that engage in porn than women. Now, think about the idea of pornography and men relating to pornography. And imagine, and this is also all, sort of data that we know, the average male in porn has a penis size that is 7 inches on the low end and, like 12 inches on the high end, but it's somewhere around 8 to 9 inches that is the normal size that you're going to see in porn. Now, this is literally double the average male penis size. The average male penis size is about 5 inches, and this is erect. And if you're a man listening to this and you want to actually know how this is measured, or if you're a woman, you measure basically to the base of the penis, at the side of the penis, up to the very tip of the penis, erect. Now, if we're talking about flaccid penis, we're talking about it's about 3 inches on average for men. And there are growers and showers, and we'll talk a little bit about this. And I'll just give you a basic course on this really quickly, and then we'll see where Emily wants to go with this. But right away, you see, okay, well, if I'm 5 inches erect, and I'm looking at porn, and these men are 7 inches at minimum, and 12, up to 12 inches maximum. This is going to make any male, especially a male who is not engaged with sports, isn't in locker rooms, isn't seeing other men, other penises, which is normally the case. This is going to make your average male, who is completely fine and normal, feel incredibly not fine and normal relative to penis size. This is a big deal. And then, of course, men, not only are men the showers, where they're outwardly showing their genitalia, they are also the performers. So they have to get an erection and maintain an erection to perform sexually. So these are 2 areas that are completely where men can feel very insecure about either the way they look, the way the genitals look, and also related to the way these perform. And if you're in the Western world and you're circumcised, and you're someone from outside the Western world and uncircumcised living in one of these countries, that also can be something that is an issue of insecurity. And so this is what men are dealing with silently. It's something that is never talked about. And it is something that I think is really important as we get into insecurities in general in relationships. And we could talk a little bit about how that, sort of bleeds over into the way men would approach sex and whether they're willing to talk about sex or what they need to say. And the final thing I'll say here, because a lot of men don't know this, most women do, because the average woman is going to see more penises than the average man, right? And there are growers and showers. A lot of women talk about this amongst themselves. A lot of men don't necessarily know this. And essentially what this means is a grower is someone, let's say, whose flaccid penis is, 3 inches and grows to, let's say, 7 inches. A shower would be someone, let's say, whose flaccid penis is, let's say, 4 inches, and they grow to 5 inches. And so one of the interesting things about this is that you can't necessarily look at a male's flaccid penis to see how big that male may grow to on erection. And this is another thing that can be very insecurity for men. The other thing is that there is the cremaster muscle, which sort of pulls the testicles into the body, and the suspensory ligament, which kind of pulls the shaft closer to the body. So if you are cold, this cremaster muscle is going to constrict and contract and pull the testicles up into the body, closer to the body. And if you have a very tight suspensory ligament, this can also pull the shaft of the penis closer to the body. Now imagine you're also overweight and you've got a very strong suspensory ligament, and you also have a lot of fat around this area. That also can make you appear much smaller than you actually are. And also body size has to deal with this. The final thing I'll say here is that women, when you ask them in surveys what they prefer, they do prefer slightly bigger penises than average, but they don't prefer giant penises. It's about 6 inches on average that a woman would prefer, which is right in line with the 5 to 7 inches that is the average for most men. Women do often say in surveys that they find larger penises more erotic to look at, but aren't necessarily preferring them sexually. So this is something that we can get into, and we can get into some of the issues around any area you want to go, Emily, in terms of premature ejaculation, erection issues, what may be causing that. But this just sort of sets up the conversation around this, that, men have a lot of issues in this area in terms of insecurity. And it's a big deal if you're romantically interested in men, how to work, sort of around this. Mm-hmm.
And actually, before we kind of like dive more into the even more into the penis side of this in terms of maybe like some erectile issues and stuff like that. I was telling you about some research that I had come across that I found fascinating, that when they did eye tracking motions, when they tracked people's eye movements as they were watching porn, both men and women watching porn, the men were actually far more likely to be focused on the woman's, this is heterosexual porn that they're watching, focused on the woman's eyes and lips and their faces in general, and like making sure that they were enjoying it and the reactions that they were having to the intercourse or whatever sexual act was being performed. Whereas the women were actually much more likely to be focused on the male genitalia. And it seems like stereotypically that would be reversed. But I wanted to share that to kind of show just how invested most men really are in the woman's pleasure, more so than is often given credit for. And they may not perhaps always express it in the best possible way, but I do think that that's important to mention. The other part is I'd love to get into a little bit more of erectile dysfunction with you, because this is something that is becoming more prevalent, partly because of porn addiction. There are a variety of other reasons that can come into this, but that's one of them. And there's so much related to erectile dysfunction that is rooted in the emotional and psychological aspects that don't get considered quite as often. And so it can be that a pill like Viagra, Cialis, whatever, is assigned to just pop a pill and that'll fix the problem. But what's interesting is that I have seen this in both my personal and professional life, where men who have perhaps struggled with erectile issues potentially for years, when they are in the context of a relationship where they actually feel emotionally and psychologically safe, all of a sudden they don't have any issues anymore.
Yeah, it's a really big issue. So let's tackle this. The first thing that I think women and men need to know about erections is just a little bit about some of the biochemistry and some of the science behind it. So let's go through that, because then that gets into some of like how to know if this is due to cardiovascular disease, for example, or whether this is mental emotional. So one of the things that I like to think about is the brain, the biochemistry, right? And sort of the blood flow. So the brain stuff has to do with the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic is rest, digest, right? You also can think of it as point, erection. Sympathetic is more flee, fight, freeze. And you also can think of it as shoot, for ejaculation. Now, these two sides of the nervous system need to be balanced. Now, imagine you are someone who is hypervigilant, you have a stressed out physiology, and you have a history of trauma and or abuse, including sexual abuse. What we know about this, especially adverse child events, is that the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system have some dysregulation sort of going on. So there's either suppression and or amplification of the sympathetic system. And it can be either or. And it can cause then issues in the bedroom with erections. But in this regard, remember, point is parasympathetic. You need to be relaxed. You need to feel safe to get an erection and keep an erection. Sympathetic innervation has to do with ejaculation. So this will tell you a little bit in terms of if someone can get an erection, maintain an erection, but is never able to actually ejaculate, or it takes them a very long time. This might be someone who is in a very parasympathetic state and or has put themselves in a very parasympathetic state, like with marijuana or something like that, or alcohol. But alcohol is tricky because it can go either way here. Versus someone who can't get an erection or has a softer, not necessarily a full erection, but ejaculates very quickly. This could be someone who has some dysregulation in this area as well. We could talk a little bit about how to deal with this. But one of the best ways to deal with this is to meditation, things like masturbation without ejaculation, edging, holding off, things like this, things that teach the penile nervous system, the brain-penis connection, to regulate better. Now, with the biochemistry, this has to do a lot with testosterone. Testosterone actually has impact on the spongy tissue of the penis that makes it able to dilate blood vessels. And so testosterone actually increases certain sensitivity to things like nitric oxide in the blood that can actually fill up the penis. And the penis works, just so everyone knows, it kind of works like as the pressure builds up, what it does is blood flow rushes into the penis and certain blood vessels expand and dilate and open up and others constrict. So it creates this sort of hydrostatic pressure. So this sort of blood flow in, almost like pinching off the end of a hose to increase pressure. This is partly how that works. And it has to do with testosterone levels. Normal testosterone levels are important for that penile tissue to be sensitive to this. And then the final aspect is nitric oxide is a really big aspect of this, which dilates blood vessels to rush blood in. And believe it or not, one of the most interesting areas of research here is bacteria in the back of the tongue actually fix dietary nitrates into nitrite, which is made into nitric oxide. So we know that things that are very high in nitrates, beets and arugula being big ones. So men who are eating a lot of salads, believe it or not, they get a lot of nitrates. We're not talking about bacon and some of these things that are put nitrates. You get far more from things like deep leafy greens, collards, kale, Brussels sprouts, but probably the biggest ones and most popular ones are going to be beets and arugula. They provide a lot of nitric oxide, and you will notice an effect. Most men will notice an effect of stronger erections, better lasting erections when they use nitric oxide. And there are supplements out there that basically increase arginine and or amino acids like citrulline that will raise arginine levels. And so this is partly what they're doing. But that gives you a basic background on this. Now, the final thing I'll say here, for older men, normally erectile dysfunction is going to come from cardiovascular issues. And they're going to benefit perhaps more from making sure they don't have low testosterone, getting more nitric oxide and nitrates into the body. Younger men, it's almost always going to be, although we are seeing an uptick in low testosterone levels in men and very low sperm levels, by the way, but it's going to be more likely to be related to mental, emotional stuff. So that gives you sort of a balance there. And I don't know where you want to go with that, Emily, or what the questions would be. Certainly, people who are romantically encountering men or interested in men are going to run into a lot of these issues. I don't know one man, including myself, who hasn't at some point had a romantic encounter where their erections were problematic, either because of drinking, either because of things that went on in their life. Actually, I'll just be vulnerable with you all here. I had an issue shortly after my affair and my divorce. I had about a 2-year period of time there where not only was my sexual libido gone, but I was just like, my erections are just gone, and I didn't really know what to do about that. It was the first time in my life that I had an issue like that. It was completely related to some of the mental, emotional turmoil and stress that I was undergoing. And so this is often not talked about, that lack of erections are perhaps a sign of mood issues and or other things. And you will find drugs heavily involved here as well.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's really important for like everyone, but particularly men, to hear that from another man. And even in my professional life, I have had multiple men come to me and explain to me in our work together that following a really bad breakup or something like that, that's something that they have faced and dealt with. And just hearing the reassurance that is actually normal. And I think that women need to really understand this as well, because women can take it very personally in terms of thinking that it's about them. Mm-hmm. And that can just add even more pressure to the poor guy who is already feeling insecure about this issue that he's dealing with. And then he's also then trying to manage the woman's emotional reaction to feeling like she must somehow not be enough of a turn on for the guy. I actually saw some thread where there was some talk about what goes on in a man's head when he's not able to have an erection. And what that stands out to me is that this guy said, "I need you to understand that my penis is not a universal judge of your hotness." Because,
so true.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, but women take it so personally because it's as though the penis determines whether or not we're attractive or not. And I think more women need to understand the very wide-ranging issues of this. And listen, ladies, we have our own internal issues and that we struggle with in that general area. Trust me, we've all dealt with that. But there is, I feel, a certain degree of privilege that can come with having internal organs that don't demonstrate outwardly as something that could make someone else insecure, like immediately.
Well, and one thing I'll add here just for women to kind of get what this is about is every woman, I think, has a degree of understanding that her level of lubrication during sex, if you've ever had a situation where you're like, you're into somebody, but you're not as wet as you would like to be, because all women are different. This is not an indication of how hot you think this guy is, how bad you want to sleep with him, all of that. This is the same thing with men.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry to break into the show, but I wanted to take a second to cover one of our sponsors and tell you all about Paleo Valley at paleovalley.com. These are the grass-fed sticks that I tell you all so much about, that all of my friends know I have on hand constantly. They are in my car. They are at my house. I keep them at my sister's home and my parents' house. I have these things everywhere because they are the simplest, most convenient whole foods protein supplement you can get. Almost like carrying around pure protein, low-carb protein in your pocket. They also, these Paleo Valley beef sticks, are the only 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef sticks on the market. They use organic spices. They are naturally fermented instead of using nitrates and nitrites that can be a problem in some of these cured meats. And they simply taste fantastic. Check out the original or the jalapeno. Those are my favorites. Please make sure you go over to paleovalley.com and visit. When checking out, use the code NEXTLEVEL for a 15% discount. Remember, our sponsors keep the show going by you giving them your patronage and spending your money on these high quality products. You actually do a few things. One, you're helping to support the podcast. And two, you are helping your health. And three, you are making sure that good quality companies like Paleo Valley can be out there doing their business, changing the world, making the earth better. One of the things you may not know about this is that grass-fed organic and grass-finished beef is doing something that is so utterly important for our environment, actually helping to repopulate the topsoil. A lot of people don't know this, but our topsoil is being extremely depleted. And raising animals, especially cattle, the correct way helps to get that topsoil back. This is one of the reasons why I love Paleo Valley. Not to mention it tastes fantastic, but they're one of these companies, like my other sponsors, Cured Nutrition and Organifi, that are doing the right things by the environment. I really appreciate everything they do, and I hope you will check them out. Thanks so much. paleovalley.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. And now back to the show.
So I'd love to explore a little bit more around how we can tie this in with diving a little bit deeper into the mental and emotional aspects of this, how we can cultivate emotional and psychological safety within a relationship, and what is it about certain relationships that make literally someone's penis feel safer to have an erection. And looking at some of those differences, because a lot of times we don't even necessarily realize that we perhaps feel unsafe in a relationship until we are far enough away from it or get enough distance from it or have a completely different experience, that then we can look back on that other instance and go, oh, I thought I was super comfortable with them, but actually I wasn't. And that's a big reason why I maybe was having some difficulty in that particular area.
Well, the big thing I would say, and I think a lot, I'll try to go with older adults and younger adults, and meaning that, people in their 20s, normally early 20s, are going to deal with this a little different. Let me just talk a little bit about this in general, in terms of the sexual thing. One of the biggest mistakes people make, I think, and I think it continues into adulthood. So I think this is for older individuals and younger individuals. is the degree to which, the speed at which people want to get in bed with each other, right? So from my perspective, the first thing, if you are a man or you're dealing with a man who might have some insecurities, this is why, to me, this whole thing, remember this idea of like, women, and I have said this to you, I've talked about this with a lot of women where I'm just like, I'm a big proponent of women not just jumping into bed with men, not because it's like this idea when you're younger, it's like, it has nothing to do with because they'll think you're sexually promiscuous. Has nothing to do with that. It has to do with so you can enjoy the connection and the dynamic and really get to know this person before you get intimate with them, so that you can avoid some very common things like love bombing and, some of these things where it's like, dysfunction where the man now just sees you as something sexual, never actually got to get to know you. And with men, it's very important because a man who feels like a lack of safety in relationships, here's what's going on with a man. I can just help everyone sort of understand this. Men sexually feel like, and don't know where we necessarily got this idea, but men want to win, and they feel like they want to win, and they feel like their sexual prowess is a direct indication of the kind of man they are. And so a lot of men make a really big mistake if they're new to sexual encounters or just watching porn, that it's about penetration and it's about, I go penetration and pounding. This is what men think it's about. And they want to get as fast as possible from zero to penetration and pounding, when in reality, that is not really what sex is. It's not porn. Sex should be really about connection. And the best sex is about connection. Now, this is assuming that this is someone who really wants a depth relationship. And a lot of people who are younger, let's just face it, they might say they want a depth relationship, but they really are just still exploring. Either way, whether you are in this exploring thing or whether you are really looking for connection, I really think you need to avoid the direct, sort of pounding type, penetration and pounding type of situation.
Most people don't enjoy jackrabbit sex.
Well, that's the thing, right? Most people don't when you talk to them. Most men don't know that women don't just want to be climbed on and just pounded. They want to be touched. They want to be caressed. They want to go slow, figure these things out, even if it's just a general encounter. It's like you need to get to know the person a little bit. Touching is extremely sort of valued. And I think, women can do themselves a favor by being like, I'm not just going to jump into this thing. Men can do themselves a favor by not getting their clothes off right away, making out, touch, other things, and not just jumping right into it. And to me, I just go, look, 3 sexual encounters before actual penetration. I also would say to men, like, there's some rules here. Like, allow her to touch you, you touch her, So to me, I'm like, after 3, sort of dates, then you start to, learn to touch her, right? Learn to touch her. Maybe don't even penetrate her till the 4th or 5th date. Like, it's just, touch. Learn how to touch her so that and she's guiding you. Now, men don't know this. And so part of it is self-inflicted. They just go, I got to get in bed real quick and I got to perform real quick. And you're setting yourself up for failure. Now, if you're someone that already knows, you don't want to just make these general rules. But if you're someone, there's just a lot of chemistry in the room and you're really turned on, then go with it. But if you're someone that's like, I know I tend to have an issue with this, I tend to get erectile issues until I feel comfortable, then you really need to take this slow. I will say a couple other things for women. Learn to enjoy a flaccid penis and learn to be as curious about a flaccid penis as an erect penis, and learn how to use your hands as well. I would say, especially with your current lover. This is another thing that I would say. We can fall into these difficult things. Like, I don't know how many times I've had my guy friends just like, the old fashioned, like just a hand job would be like, I just love that, and no one wants to do that anymore. And how many girls have said, fingers are underrated and touch is underrated. I said it to you the
other day. I was like, getting someone off.
Yeah, exactly.
I said a man getting a woman off with their fingers is an underrated skill that like not enough men have mastered.
Absolutely. And I would say the same thing with women and men. Now, of course, it's gross generalization here. That's the problem talking about sex. We talked about this as well. Like, talking about insecurity, people have different sexual proclivities, and they're oftentimes very insecure about their sexual proclivities. And what I would say is that you and I talked about this idea that, if I'm very experimental in bed and my partner is very conventional in bed, and we're at the extremes of that, that is a potential issue. However, if, on a scale of 1 to 10, she's like a 4 conventional experimental, and I'm like a 7 experimental conventional, that is potentially fantastic sex, and there's some leeway in there. And to me, it's understanding these dynamics. Insecurity comes from the idea that everyone's this way and I don't fit the mold. Instead of realizing that, first of all, no, they're not. Everyone is not this way. They're all very individual. So you men out there who are just like, oh, this is how it's done, and everyone has 9-inch penises and they're able to get their woman off with just, whatever, because I'm watching porn all the time. Not true. And also the idea that women want, someone to just penetrate and pound them. Not true. So what that does is allows you to go, oh, I have a particular way that I approach this, particular interest sexually, and I don't need to be insecure about it. Instead, I just need to cultivate it, be able to communicate it in a way, and be able to be comfortable within that. And that means going slow, learning to communicate, not just jumping into bed. I think insecurities come from this place with a lot of men. And I also think, that talking about this, like one of the things I told you, I was on this men's panel once, several years back, and there were about 100 some women in the audience, and the question from it was basically 3 men and all women, and the question was about porn. And 2 of the guys on the panel with me took the perspective of how dangerous porn is, how it is not a good thing for society, and made some decent points. However, I go, porn is a reality. And so one of the things I said is that instead of trying to take something that we know is going to go on and you're not going to be able to stop, why not use it to your advantage and understand the porn that your man likes? And for the man, also understand the porn that you like and the fantasy land that you live in, and so that you can begin to have conversations around that and get comfortable with that. The idea is that you're not abnormal, and that no one is the same in this realm, and we need to explore where we are in that. And there's sort of 2 ways to look at this. There's the hypothesis of the hand and glove hypothesis, penis and vaginal fit. And then there's the sort of fit, psychological fit, whether or not, someone is more conventional, more experimental, more dominant, more submissive, this kind of thing. So I think with insecurities, one of the first conversations you have to have is this idea that everyone's a little bit different, and you should, work to understand yourself, and then work to understand your partners and how, he or she is different, and then work to merge that. And that's going to be a better situation.
There's so many points that I want to dig into with that. One of them, I studied under Cam Fraser, who's a very well-known male sexologist, therapist. He's incredible, and he specializes in men's sexuality. I had him on my podcast, and people have just raved about that episode because he covers so many beautiful aspects of it. And one of many things that I've talked to about with him and that he teaches on is the exploration essentially of a flaccid penis, because just because the penis is erect, the nerve endings are still the same. Like the nerve endings are there, whether the penis is flaccid or whether it is not. It doesn't make any difference. So it's almost as though there's like this fear of a flaccid penis. Like women maybe don't know what to do with it, and men are afraid to have one. And I'm like, can we just accept that like a flaccid penis is still a penis? Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. What can we do to bring pleasure in that particular instance? And for men, like how can you, and I would offer this advice to women as well. Everyone needs to get better at exploring your own bodies and not necessarily making that so centered on like just the clitoris or like just the penis. How can you, if you're masturbating, like bring a more pleasurable experience into exploring different parts of your body? Noticing like if you really lightly touch your arm, like the sensation of how that feels, being in the present moment with yourself. And that can end up translating into a far better sexual experience when you are with someone else then as well. And in terms of the types and stuff too, I think that that's really important to bring into conversations around sexual chemistry and really noticing these different aspects and the different types of fit and everything else. There's just so many areas where we need to be able to explore. And there's so many other points that you made that I want to touch on, and they're all escaping me right now. But I think that there's so many areas that we need to be able to tap into with this. A question that I pose to you, that I have posed to many people, and I usually direct it towards sex, but it can actually apply to relationships. It can apply to a variety of different contexts, is, are you most seeking pleasure, connection, or transcendence? And the first question that most people usually have is define transcendence. I'm like, you define transcendence. Like, what does transcendence mean to you? A lot of times when we are, if you are someone who orients towards wanting to create and cultivate a very deeply connected romantic relationship and sexual connection within that relationship, there can often be parts of ourselves that we want to transcend into something new. Like, that's part of the growth aspect. So however you define that, and I'm not saying that we have to pick one over the other, all three play a beautiful and really important role. But is there something that you are more focused on? If you are solely focused on pleasure, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful thing. But then you may be able to cultivate pleasure with just some random that you meet on the street. And that's fine. That's great. If you want connection, that's a little bit different. Then you can have both, cultivating that a little bit more. Transcendence is probably, in my opinion, more likely if you are engaged with someone that you care for deeply, like that both parties are very mutually reciprocal in their feelings on towards each other and about the relationship. And you're creating pleasure, you're creating connection, and you are growing that into something different to tap into different versions of yourselves, both individually and within the context of the relationship.
Yeah, well, I think with men, I think this is a big problem with men. And I think it goes back to this idea. If you're a man, part of one of the biggest insecurities for men in this realm would be the idea that they're not good in bed, right? Like, men take a lot of, and so do women. It's like this idea that you and I was laughing at this with you because I had this thing that people go, and I'll just share this with you. You guys can see how you feel with this, but it'll go into this. To me, I'm like, people who say I'm good in bed.
This is what I wanted to bring up. Yeah. Yes, thank you for bringing
people who go, oh, I'm so good in bed. Or, and you hear it. Honestly, I hear this a lot more from women than I do men. I've never really heard one of my male friends go, I'm really good in bed. I have only ever heard that from women.
I'm such a stud.
I haven't heard that. And I go, part of me just goes, the fact that you said that, now this might trigger some people, but I am very defined on this, goes, no, you're not. And here's the reason why. If you think you're good in bed, then you think there's a way to do sex most of the time. Now, there's a caveat to this, which I'll get to, which means that you probably do it one way. You're like, I give a great blowjob, right? Or something like that. And I'm like, maybe to the guy you dated when you were 15, when you first started doing that, and then now that's what you do, and you think every single man responds to that in the exact same way. That to me goes, that is not what good sex really is. Good sex is finding out what that particular man wants, what lights him up, and that particular woman wants. So to me, I think, insecurity wise, for both men and women, being like, am I good in bed? First of all, I think if you think you are, then you're probably making the mistake that everyone is built the same, that every penis is built the same, every vagina is built the same, every sex brain is built the same, and you're just doing the same thing, right? You're basically doing oral the same way on every single person, or you're doing sex the same way. This, to me, is the breeding ground. The underlying assumption is wrong, and it's the breeding ground for insecurity. The best way to be good is to be thinking about it like, I wonder if our sex will be good. How can I be good in bed for this person? It's a far more humble, a far more exploratory, a far more meeting someone sort of in the middle. That's the first thing I would say. Now, the other thing I would say is, especially for men, because I do think they perhaps fall more into this category of just pleasure. And the reason why I think they do is a very important reason. Women don't experience pleasure the same way as men, and it's far more nuanced. We can just look at How often do women orgasm compared to men? Men, from the time they puberty, it's pretty much a straight shot. 90% of the time, they report orgasm. It's basically stimulation to orgasm. That is not the case for women. It is not stimulation to orgasm. In fact, many women will tell you, you can stimulate me all day long, but if you don't stimulate my brain, or I don't hear you, or you're not talking to me, or whatever it is that woman's into, they can't get off. So to me, men need to understand this. So if men are just about pleasure, this is going to come into their insecurities, because what a lot of women are going to say is that's a selfish man. This is being friends with women. I hear this all the time. But I had a data points of surveys for women that had about 2,500 data points where I asked about what women wanted and what their biggest complaint was. And I can tell you the biggest complaint that seemed to come up over and over again was, and this was a cis hetero survey. And the term they used was selfish lovers. This was a really big issue for women. And basically, when you dig into this, it's basically a man who penetrates, impounds, and gets off, and doesn't really leave much for the women. And we also know men have a very long refractory period, unless you're a very young man in general. And so that leaves the woman without much pleasure. And that is a selfish, that's what they mean by selfish lover. So I would say if you're a man in your pleasure, connection, transcendence piece, if you're just after pleasure and you're a man, that right there is going to feed into your insecurity about being a good lover, because you're probably not going to be pleasing your woman. However, if you're about pleasure for your partner, and I do think this is the better way for a man to approach sex, that you always come second just by the dynamics, and you also get comfortable without coming, and you understand that, communicate that with your lover, and women get comfortable with men not actually coming and allowing them to receive and just receive, and to play this game with lovers. This is a better way to deal with this. But I'll say briefly about your, this idea. And I don't normally think about it this way, but if I was going to think about pleasure versus connection versus transcendence, to me, I would say that pleasure plus connection, and assuming connection has a very strong component of presence there, is going to lead to transcendence. To me, transcendence simply means, if you've ever meditated, you know what this is like. When you drop into this place where you kind of are like, well, I'm nowhere, I'm no one, there's no time, there's I just feel like I'm sort of in this other world. To me, that's what transcendence in sex is like. It's like this mutual meditation that is about being connected and immersing yourself into the pleasure. If you want to understand it more, think of listening to an amazing song where you close your eyes and you let the music take you away. You could be present with the music. You could be listening to the music, but it's only this place where you just immerse yourself in it and allow all the other distractions to sort of go away, which is why I think if you're totally like, am I doing it right? Is she going to come? Is he turned on? How come he's not completely hard? Any of all this stuff that you're thinking about in bed, first of all, you're not connected. You're never going to reach transcendence. Transcendence to me is more about presence and a meditative state in the bedroom. And it's about exploring sexuality apart from actually the idea of I'm just going to get some pleasure and I'm just going to get off. Some of the best sexual experiences of my life have been experiences that were more meditative, and I didn't even come, or she didn't either. And a lot of people who've never experienced this wouldn't even know what this is like if they're just about pleasure. So I do think a lot of our insecurities come from the idea that we think we have to get and give pleasure, and if we don't, we're a failure, right? And honestly, I'll say one more thing here, because it's just a pet peeve of mine as well. And this goes into honesty. And this goes into a lot of conversations I've had with men, and also just something for women to be aware of. Most men that I am close with find it very disturbing and dishonest for a woman to fake orgasm. Mm-hmm. And orgasm is, women faking orgasm is incredibly common. And most of the guys I know, my close friends, know and accept the fact that they're not always going to be able to get their woman to that place, and are completely fine with it, but are a little bit insulted when a woman fakes. Now, to be honest, most of us aren't going to know, right? Like we're not really going to know. but we can, we also, have an intuitive sense about us. And so we can have an intuitive sense that wasn't real, and that doesn't feel very good, and it actually feeds into our insecurities as men. And so my whole thing is, if you're wondering about male insecurities and yet you're faking orgasm all the time, then you might be feeding into that. And it is a catch-22 for women, right? Because it's like, look, there are a very high amount, and men need to understand this, there's a pretty high and significant amount of women who cannot come through penetration, and a fairly high amount that don't really come at all. And pretty much every woman doesn't come always, even if they are, good at achieving that. And this is something that men also need to be aware of to allay their insecurities, right? I want to jump in real quick and tell you about one of my favorite new products. And to start out, I want to ask you a question. If you had to follow your friends around who are not the healthiest in the world and see what they are doing, what would be the number one thing you would probably tell them to do to start? For most people, that's going to be drinking more water, right? This is something that we talk about all the time in health and fitness. It's almost as if we think of it as an afterthought now, because obviously water is so crucial. However, we oftentimes get this wrong. For example, did you know that when it comes to hydration, just drinking water can make things worse? Most people don't know this. Why? Partly because most people are over drinking water and under consuming the electrolytes that help water do its job. What we don't realize is that hydration is not just about water. It's about electrolytes, the minerals in there, as well as getting that water into the cells. And so you do not want to be over consuming water if you're not getting your electrolytes right. And this opens up a whole new discussion, because most people are not getting their electrolytes right. For example, did you know that low sodium, too low sodium, is an issue just as much, if not more so, than high sodium? In other words, what we want if we're going to get the right electrolytes is to get the right amount of sodium and potassium and magnesium in the Goldilocks zone. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. We want it just right. This opens up a whole other thing here too, because people who are exercising, doing sauna therapies, doing low carb diets are disrupting and losing lots and lots of their electrolytes. For example, when insulin is not around in low carb diets, you will excrete lots of sodium. In other words, under that state, exercising, low carb diets, all these things, you actually need more sodium. And so if you're somebody who has been just drinking water, not paying attention to electrolytes, and also feeling fatigued, feeling like you're underperforming, not sleeping right, getting cramps, twitches, headaches, any of these things, then you are probably dealing with an electrolyte issue. This is where the product Element comes in. This product has been a game changer for me and many, many of my patients and clients. This is a rehydration electrolyte beverage, basically. It is a powder of electrolytes formulated with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium, without the added sugar and other nonsense that comes in beverages like Gatorade. This stuff is basically a rehydration beverage on steroids. It is the thing that is going to replenish your electrolytes in the right ratios, decrease fatigue, really correct chronic dehydration. And by the way, many people are dehydrating themselves, becoming hyponatremic, low sodium, when they're consuming too much water. You need your electrolytes on board, especially if you are someone who is losing lots of sodium and other electrolytes through low carb diets and lots of exercise. This is where Element comes in. Element is a new sponsor to the Next Level Human podcast. I cannot recommend this product enough. I have been using this stuff for months now, and I have immediately seen changes in my energy levels. I feel like I'm operating on a whole other level, and I have seen this as being the primary thing that people who have been using Element have been telling me that their fatigue is getting better, especially fatigue that comes after very intense workouts that involve lots of sweating and lots of intense output from the nervous system. Please check out Element. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. DrinkElement.com. That's DrinkLMNT.com. DrinkElement.com. And let's get back to the show.
Well, that's the thing, is that it does. Yeah. There's so many issues with I have so many issues with faking orgasms. And what's interesting is that something that is very specific to me is that if I, on any level, do not trust the man that I'm with, on any level, doesn't mean that I feel like he's going to go out and cheat on me, but just if there has been any seeds of distrust planted, I usually will have issues with that. In order to actually have an orgasm, I need to deeply trust the person that I'm with. And then there's no issues at all. But I have to really trust the person that I'm with. And that's part of that connection piece that then needs to be cultivated. I just think that the whole idea of the being good at sex, that is so incredibly subjective. And curiosity, I will always come back to this. Curiosity is such a crucial part of any relationship. And no matter which type of relationship, how you apply it, including and especially in the bedroom. And I think that part of the problem is that we have defined sex, and maybe porn, I'm sure porn has contributed to this as well, that we have defined sex as both parties, need to orgasm, and then or that once men orgasm, that's the end of sex. That is a very narrow definition of what sex is. Sex is also messy. It is incredibly vulnerable. It is primal. It is there's so many different aspects to this. And when we define sex as just two people having sex until one or both, but usually the male gets off, and then sex is done, or that sex is not an experience worth having unless one or both parties is getting off. Don't get me wrong. It's great when both parties actually have an orgasm and all the things. Yes, beautiful. But that's not the only aspect to sex. What is it that you want out of your relationships? What is it that you want out of your sexual experiences? What kind of connection do you want to cultivate within that? Because sex is such a beautiful way to cultivate connection, whether or not one or both parties orgasm. And just looking at things through this different lens where we can expand our horizons a little bit to appreciate sex for what it is, and to not necessarily even make penetration the goal. In fact, sometimes I would argue that if somebody is having maybe issues in the bedroom with their partner, take ejaculation and orgasm for both parties off the table for a little while. Take it off the table. That doesn't mean you don't have sex. That means that you explore sex from a different angle, and you don't necessarily make that the goal that gets put up on some pedestal. Explore the other ways that you can cultivate pleasure for yourself, with each other. Maybe each of you, maybe it's a mutual masturbation thing instead. If you've never done that, that can be an incredibly beautiful experience. Not only that, but foreplay, particularly for women. But honestly, I do think that it's actually a little bit more for men than they are sometimes given credit for. Foreplay is what happens in the hours, days, weeks, and months leading up to a sexual experience. So it is in the trust that is cultivated. It is in the integrity. It's in the feeling seen, heard, understood, cared for, even in small little moments, doing something to make your partner's life just a tiny little bit easier by doing some little task for them that makes them feel extra loved and cared for. It's in those moments that the connection is built, and then that can translate into the bedroom. But if we are able to expand this very narrow view that we have of sexuality, you might find that an entirely new world opens up for you with your partner and with yourself and your own sense of sexual pleasure. The other issue is communication, because a lot of women fake orgasms for so many different reasons. This can happen because they are stroking the male's ego. They feel like it's their responsibility to make the man feel good about himself. So they want to make him feel good, oh, great job, you got me off. It can be because maybe she just wants it over with. Like there can be so many different reasons why a woman fakes an orgasm. One of the biggest issues, though, I think at the root of that is communication from a variety of different angles. And this is partly why it's so important to get to know your own body, so that you also then can start to cultivate the safety within a relationship and cultivating that connection to communicate what you actually like, what it is that you want, what you don't like. And on the other side of that, being open to receiving the feedback is important too, because that can be, again, a very vulnerable moment where egos can be bruised very easily, especially in such a vulnerable setting like that. So being very careful about how taking your partner's feelings very much into consideration and explaining it with compassion. But you can tell someone or show someone how you like something done in a really beautiful way that will benefit both of you. And then you can experience even more pleasure. They will experience more pleasure because you are experiencing more pleasure. And it just turns into a beautiful mutual experience. But that communication piece has to happen. If you are not able to communicate with your partner, you're probably not going to have a very satisfying sex life. And that can lead to a not very satisfying relationship in general. You have to get comfortable with communication, both inside of the bedroom and out.
Yeah, and insecurity and communication is tough because, I mean, the fact of the matter is most people don't know how to communicate this kind of stuff. And our natural proclivity, just in general, you'll see different types. But if you want someone to change a behavior, let's make it without sex. Let's just say, let's say you want your partner to wash the dishes more. What a lot of people will do is they'll be like, you never wash the dishes. How come you don't ever do the dishes? And they'll kind of have this complaint around the dishes.
And then my brain immediately goes on the defense to immediately search for that one time that I did do the dishes, just to tell you that I did.
Exactly. And because your brain does that, the better approach with anyone is to find what they're doing really well. If they don't do the dishes, find another area where they're helping, to help them see, like, I appreciate this about you, and you will reinforce that behavior. Most of the time when you tell people they're doing something wrong, you can create more insecurity. So in the bedroom, it's far better to be like, it's far better to not go, don't do that, do this instead. It's more like, find out what they're doing that you really love, you want them to do more of, and tell them how much you love that. That's going to give them some sense of confidence and competence in the bedroom. And then once they have that, that's the way you open communication with, in my mind, positive reinforcing communication, rather than saying, do it like this. And then you begin to say, oh my God, I loved that. It would have been amazing if you did this. Instead of saying, but, use the and thing, right? So it's like, I love that and I would love this, right? Instead of going, I love that, but if you had done this, it would have been better. It's more like, oh my God, I loved that and I would love this, right? That's a very different way. And the reason I'm going through this is because a lot of people don't understand how to communicate in these ways. The other thing is that on the other side, if you are the person who's more insecure, the last thing you want to do is be preempting everything you do. The last thing, especially with a woman, and I've heard this over and over again, is to be like, does that feel good? How about that? Is that it? Did you come yet? Like, is that okay? Like this then just is like, now it's becoming like, I don't even know what that is. And so there is a debrief period afterwards.
Ooh, yes, let's talk about aftercare.
That basically is, and by the way, when I say afterwards, I don't necessarily mean post-orgasm, but it doesn't. In other words, you didn't have to orgasm, but there always should be, in my mind, a good lover is always going to be there and like be in a place where they caress their lover, and it's not just over. It's okay now. The penetration and the stimulation and all that's done. It's like, let's be here for a minute. That's one of the most beautiful aspects of orgasm anyway, this place where you're sort of in this such a present state. You're sort of in this buzzing, glowing sort of state. And you get to sit there and hold each other and talk, and that's where the debrief sort of comes from. And from my perspective, it should always start with, oh my God, I loved this. Oh my God, that was so hot. Oh my God, that was, and oh, you know what I was thinking about, right? And then all of a sudden, like, it's like, oh, like this is what they really like. And then, weeks perhaps later, several times later, you begin to open up, oh, I would love if you did this. In other words, you establish that we talk about this and we have this debrief thing. And then you begin to establish that trust of like, oh, we talk about, what we like. And then we can go, and I'd like to try this or that. And then it can open up into, and this is a fantasy of mine. Mm-hmm. And what happens is people try to do this all at once, which breeds the insecurity because it's not how it works. It needs to go relatively slowly. The other thing I would say about men, to men, is that women, if you're all about pleasure, right, your own pleasure, what you're not doing is tapping into what the signals are being sent. One of the issues men have and women complain about, and this is another thing that has to do with genitalia. Women are tucked in; they're hidden away. The clitoris is in different places. Sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's bigger. Some women have more or less labia. Men, it's like he has an erect penis. If I take that and stimulate it, but women oftentimes, men can't even find, where to touch. And it drives women nuts. But as a man, you can see her moving her hips and feel her moving her hips around, up or down, side to side. What she's doing is trying to get you in the right place without telling you. And oftentimes, if she does take your hand, let's say, and put it in the right place, pay attention to that and don't take it personally. Just understand don't get insecure about it. Take it as a sign that this woman is trusting you and actually showing you something incredibly valuable. And if you're going to make that a place of insecurity, then that's your fault. Then you're still making it all about you. But to me, you can pick up an awful lot, and women are going to show you in the way they're moving, the way they're breathing, the way you're going to feel that difference. But if you're just all about your own pleasure and you're too tapped into your insecurity, you're going to miss it. And that's how come I say, go slow, learn to touch. Don't just go to penetration and pounding. This is going to help your insecurities as a man. And I think any woman, and I want to hear your take on this, but I think most women are trying to help you figure it out. And also understand you're not abnormal that you can't figure it out, because every new female lover you're with, it's far easier for a woman to be able to go, oh, I know, I've seen a penis and I know basically what to do with it. But for men, it's going to be tough because it's going to be hard to find how this woman is built and where they like to be touched, especially internally. Like, we know that there's not a G spot inside a woman. There's many spots inside a woman that vary from woman to woman. And it can generally be in the same place. So you might want to, look for it there first, but you don't just go like, that's where it is, right? And that is, I think, a really important piece. And one hint that I could give to just women here too is that this is one thing that a lot of women don't know. So this whole thing about finding where a woman's clitoris is for a man. Women also don't know one thing that a lot of men won't tell them is that on the penis, there is an area that is just like the clitoris. It's called the frenulum. Mm-hmm. And it's basically where the head of the penis essentially meets and sort of folds in. And that area right there is it's sort of like the male clitoris. It's usually the most sensitive on a man. And this is why oftentimes if, for example, you're given oral and you're just using your mouth and not your hand and not stimulating that particular place, you may not be able to essentially get him there. By the way, for you men, this is also why a lot of masturbation, overstimulating that place, in the same way women who use vibrators can dampen the sensitivity of the clitoris, men who are constantly stimulating themselves can also dampen the sensitivity of this area. So these are all things just to basically give you some heads up on, you don't need to be insecure about these things, but you should be aware of these things. So there's this fine line from being so confident, like I'm the best in bed, and being so confident about that versus being completely insecure. The truth is you don't know. The you confident types who think you know, you actually don't unless you're exploring that particular partner. And you insecure types who think you're clueless actually need to understand that the truth is you are clueless about that new lover. And you should treat each, you don't have to be insecure about it because you can treat it as an exploratory process, both helping them figure you out mentally and physically and figuring them out.
And what a beautiful way to create that connection with each other. Like, what a beautiful opportunity to be able to do that and to take the time to be present, to get to know your lover in that way is really powerful. And there are so many women I've talked to, and I've experienced this in the past before myself, because it feels almost traumatic when you have sex with a man, and then as soon as the sex is over, like he's like rolled over and gone to sleep or whatever. So that aftercare piece is really, really important. And it's important for both parties. Like, it's really meaningful for both. And there is such intimacy that can be created in those moments. If you feel like you're lacking in intimacy in your relationship, this is a really beautiful place to start with that and to ask questions. And if you are afraid to ask the questions, ask yourself why. Like, are you afraid to get the answers? Are you afraid that more insecurities will come up if your lover suggests that he or she would like something done a different way? Because that's on you to manage your own expectations around that and to shift that into like, what a beautiful opportunity that your lover is giving you instead to help both them and you experience more pleasure and create even deeper intimacy together. That is an opportunity. So we have to reframe some of these moments that we can take something very personally, but instead be like, oh, this is a gift. This is a gift to actually get even closer with my partner and to be able to create something even more beautiful in really, really powerful ways. There's so many aspects to this conversation that I'm sure you and I could go on all day about, but I feel like we'll probably start wrapping it up. Is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think we can wrap it up with one more area. Maybe this is the final sort of aspect of this. Let's take it out of the bedroom just for a minute. So I think women can understand. This is also not really talked about with men a lot. One key thing that, you've mentioned and you and I have talked about before is how a man not owning a woman, right, is a big insecurity of a woman. It can trigger her insecurities. Like, why aren't you sharing me? Why aren't you introducing me? Why aren't you on social media and all this kind of stuff? Now, the male equivalent of that outside of the bedroom, I think there's many different areas and all men are different. So figure your man out. But one I could tell you that's a big complaint and a big insecurity of men is that women need to be owned. Men need to be respected. So that's where I don't love this language, but I'll use it here because I think it feeds into this. This is where some of, this language like my king or my queen or stuff like that come from. I think like men want to be seen by their very nature as capable, like they have potential, like they are heading somewhere, whether you're in a relationship with them or not. If men don't feel like they have potential, like they are capable, like they are confident, like they can show up strong, that is incredibly wrecking to their mood, to their vitality, to their sense of self-worth, and self-esteem. What men need and want the most from their women is that their women see them that way and at least believe that they can be that way. And I think one of the biggest things that oftentimes women do is they don't realize that when men fail at something, they really need someone to say, babe, I got you. And you're such an amazing man. And I love the way you show up. And it's sort of like this. Think back to women are a little different this way. Like men will see a woman, in her panties or something like that first thing in the morning and be like, oh my God, she's so hot. Or see her like with just a t-shirt on in the kitchen and just be like, she's so hot. She's so beautiful. Women are slightly different. They see their man like, I don't know, changing, a tire or fixing a car or, seeing them like deliver a pitch for work or seeing them on stage talking or seeing them. When women see their men doing things out in the world, women can be very turned on by seeing their man in that particular place. And when they don't, they can oftentimes be like, he's not doing anything or see him as, ineffectual. And that is the worst thing you can do for a man. In fact, I would argue that if you want a man to go outside of the relationship or find emotional intimacy elsewhere or disconnect from you, you start to see him or make him feel as if he is not good, not respected, has no potential. that is the worst thing you can do for a man, and it breeds insecurity, and it will show up in all areas of life, including your sexual, relationship with a man. So I would just point that out. Now, me as a man, I could tell you I have one rule. Like if a woman disrespects me or sees me in a way or any of that, I'm out. Like I just don't do that. That's like, usually most things, it's like, we're going to figure that out. Those are hardcore rules. Like for me, it's just like, if I have a woman, like I once had, a girlfriend of mine call her husband a pussy. And I remember being like, dude, any woman ever refers to me that way that I'm romantically involved with, it is over. Like there is no way you're going to call me a loser or a pussy. There's actually a famous Jerry Maguire. This is the cute little movie with I forget the Tom Cruise and I think Renee Zellweger. But anyway, there's this point where he's with his fiance and she goes, "You're not a loser," in like sort of this sarcastic way. And he goes, "Wait a second, who said anything about loser?" And that's when they break up. And I think it's important to remember if you cause your man to see that way or feed into that, it's going to be done. That is a major, major insecurity as a man.
That's huge for men. And I did an entire podcast episode on this once as well, that we need to surround ourselves, and this goes for anyone, no matter how you identify, with people who believe in us. That is really important. I dated a guy who did not believe in me, and I broke up with him pretty fucking fast because he maybe believed in elements of me, but he did not believe in what I was capable of, and I was out. I was totally out because I recognize so deeply the power that comes from being surrounded by people who believe in me. I would not be where I am today if it was not for people believing in me before I believed in myself. And I see what a gift that can be. I also see how you can crush people by not believing in them. Yeah. And that's really, really important. The last thing I will say as well, just because it ties in really well with this episode, and then we'll definitely wrap it up, is that we do not own our partner's fantasy life. We do not own our partner's fantasy life. And I have heard a lot of people, particularly women, make this argument that it's a form of cheating if their partner is fantasizing about another woman, even if he never does anything about it, that is like a form of betrayal. And I understand where they're coming from. I get it. Like I understand the point that they're trying to make, but Wednesday Martin is a researcher. She wrote a book called Untrue. And I actually want to bring her on my podcast, where she shatters a lot of the myths that we hold around female sexuality. I really recommend the book if anyone wants to check it out. And one of the many things that she pointed out through the research is that women have incredibly rich fantasy lives, often even more so than men. Again, we're shattering some stereotypes here, and regularly will fantasize about people other than their partners. That doesn't mean that they're doing anything about it. We all as humans have very rich, imaginative inner worlds. And there is nothing wrong with having a particular fantasy. Now, if you are fantasizing about the same person over and over again, who you are not in a relationship with, and I'm not talking like a celebrity, I'm talking someone who would realistically be a potential sexual partner for you, like a friend or an old lover or something like that, maybe like a teacher or whatever, that is something to be concerned about. So again, there's some gray area here, but if you are constantly fantasizing about like the same person over and over again, who is not your partner, that may be problematic. If you have a fantasy that you indulge yourself in occasionally, like when you masturbate or whatever, where it's about someone who isn't your partner, I do not see anything wrong with that. And to me, it is very much part of being human, and trying to control that in your partner, again, like stifling aspects of themselves, as opposed to, and you don't even necessarily need to share it with your partner either. So this is the other thing, is that honest, open, direct communication, I am all for, I am the biggest proponent of. And I also think that there are aspects that we don't necessarily need to communicate to our partner, because it would actually be an unnecessary breeding ground for insecurity.
100%.
And again, there is gray area on this where I'm like, okay, like where is the exact line? But if I'm in a relationship with someone and I have a fantasy about someone else, just like 1, 2 times perhaps, I don't see what benefit it would be to share with my partner, by the way, I fantasized about someone else a couple times. Hope you're cool with that. That is just going to create seeds of doubt with them. Even if I'm never going to do anything about it, it's just unnecessary. But if I'm if I'm fantasizing about somebody else like consistently all the time, then yes, that may need to create a dialogue, even, and first of all, within myself of like, okay, well, what's going on here? Like that's something that we need to look internally within, and that may end up needing to be a conversation with our partner, but we do not own our partner's fantasy life.
Yeah. It's interesting too. If you want to really get someone super insecure, have them share something vulnerable sexually with you.
Yes.
And then say, oh my God, that's so dysfunctional.
Yes.
Like, I don't know, baby, I would love to see you with another man or something like that. And you're just like, what the hell? Like, that will make them more insecure. However, those things are things that you would then have a discussion about. But I agree with you. In one way, I deal with that as a man is I just assume that's going on. Mm-hmm. Because to me, the way I look at stuff is I just go, humans are humans. So I'm pretty positive my lover, especially after being with her for a while, is probably at some point going to fantasize about a past sexual encounter or somebody or something other than me. And I start from the thing of like, so what? It's got nothing to do with me. But this is why, I said earlier in this podcast, a lot of this has to do with maturity. Like, to me, if you go out and act that out and don't tell me, then that's a hard, like, you lie to me, then it's done. But I just assume this is what humans do naturally. They're going to have a fantasy world. They're going to sometimes imagine being with other people, perhaps. And to me, I just go, that's something that you just assume, at least I just assume that's going on. And it's not something I concern myself with in that regard. And I do think that's why, it's funny that you went there, because when you went there, I'm thinking in my head, damn, you just went there. And like, honestly, a lot of people are going to be like, oh no, that's just like, I would imagine most people listening to us right now are having a really hard time with this. But I would say I 100% agree with that. It's just normal stuff. And I'm just really big on letting humans be humans and being aware and just honest the fact that humans are humans, especially in sexuality. You cannot, paint your sexual brain with your partner. And you have to realize that they are unique. You have to let them express that. And you have to, be in a place where you get to see how you two fit, realizing that you're never, in all aspects, you're never going to fit completely. And this is a very, very important aspect of this. And I would say, to your point, if you're going to try to own your partner's fantasy life, that sex is going to get pretty bad pretty quick. And that relationship probably ain't going to be as fulfilling as you want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think ultimately the point that I really want to make before we sort of wrap up is just expanding into the fullness of yourself and allowing the other person to expand into their own fullness and allowing the relationship itself to expand into its fullness. And the more we try to stifle aspects of ourselves or shame someone or shame ourselves or limit ourselves, you're stamping down the possibilities that are very open and available to you. So the more you can allow that expansion to happen with exploration, with curiosity, with love, and even like platonic love in some ways, like just allowing that intimacy, the space to grow and providing the fertile ground for it to grow within, that is where you will be able to cultivate the relationships that you want.
Yeah, let's share one very funny. I want to share one very funny thing with everyone before we wrap up.
I'm like, oh God, what is he going to say?
And it's, it's just something that's funny because you and I mentioned, so I'm like, well, you went there, so I'm going to go here. and then we'll wrap up. But one other thing that I will say that's just funny as hell and has to do with me and my hetero male friends is when hetero female friends are getting sexual advice from their homosexual male friends.
You're going there.
Yeah. This is something that I just think is absolutely, but it goes to this whole thing about quit trying to paint the brush broad like this. Trust me when I tell you, the vast majority of hetero men are going not to be into what the vast majority of homosexual men are into. And so homosexual men, if you're listening to this, please don't give your heterosexual girlfriends advice for us heterosexual men. In the same way, you probably wouldn't want us heterosexual men giving homosexual men advice about how to be with men. It's just, this is the kind of thing that I just think is hilarious to me because it just goes sideways. But I really love this conversation because I think it's really important. And hopefully all of you are listening. These are the kind of conversations, right, that I think no one has, which is why we wanted to have it. And it's just stuff that we kind of, it's not, obviously we don't want to have these conversations like in, around family at Thanksgiving necessarily.
Well, at your house,
like
yes.
At my house we do. But I do think hopefully a lot of people listen to this and they go, I might not tell people about this conversation, but I got something deep from this conversation.
This will be one of the episodes that you and I both have episodes in our podcast where it ends up being like one of the top downloaded episodes, but no one talks about it.
Yeah, I have one embarrassingly that was how to be a good lover. And of course, in the beginning of that podcast, I go, look, I'm not saying I'm a good lover. I'm probably horrible for some, but I can tell you some things I've learned mainly from that research study that I did that actually was my research study. It's too bad I've lost that data because I would really have loved to.
Oh, you lost it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It was on an old SurveyMonkey account and I can't find it. But anyway, I think these are important conversations to be had in this realm. So thank you for hanging out. Another fun conversation.
This is just a tiny window into the things that Jade and I talk about.
Yeah. More to come. Have a good time, everybody. And thanks for hanging out with us.
You have been listening to the Next Level Human podcast with Dr. Jade Teta. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe and consider leaving a review. You make the biggest difference when you pass on your lessons and inspire others. That's why reviews like this are so powerful. Your words may be the only ones that resonate for someone else. Please remember the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only. Always consult your personal physician or therapist before making any lifestyle changes. And finally, thank you for who you are in the world and the difference you make.